A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
So, Herman, I was looking at a picture of a new banknote today that looks like it belongs in a board game, but it is the grim reality for millions of people right now. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the release of the 10 million Rial note in Iran and what it says about the broader global shift away from fiat currency toward tangible assets. It is March 23rd, 26, and we are seeing things in the financial world that would have seemed like science fiction just 5 years ago.
Herman Poppleberry here, and Corn, you are not exaggerating. This is a massive story that most people are treating as a regional curiosity, but it is actually an early warning sign for the entire global financial system. On March 21st, just 2 days ago, the Central Bank of Iran officially put this 10 million Rial note into circulation. To give you an idea of the scale of the collapse there, this note, the highest denomination in their history, is worth about $7 US. Just a few weeks ago, they had to rush out a 5 million Rial note. They are printing money faster than the public can even figure out how to count the zeros. It is the ultimate irony, printing more paper to solve a crisis that was caused by printing too much paper in the first place.
That is the part that caught my eye. I saw a report mentioning that the Central Bank of Iran is actually printing the last 4 zeros on the note in very faint light ink. It is almost like they are trying to hide the inflation from the people holding the bill. What is the logic there, Herman? Is it just a design choice to make the bill look less cluttered, or is there a deeper psychological game being played on the Iranian public?
It is a tactical move, Corn. It is not about aesthetics, it is about reconditioning the public on a national scale. They are trying to move the country toward a new unit called the toman. 1 toman equals 10,000 Rials. By making those 4 zeros faint, they are trying to train the Iranian public to just ignore them and start thinking in tomans. It is a desperate attempt to stop the psychological bleeding. When you are dealing with 47.5% annual inflation and food prices that have jumped over 100% in early 26, the government has to find a way to make the numbers feel smaller. If the numbers feel too big, the currency stops feeling like money and starts feeling like a joke. Once a currency becomes a punchline, the social contract that sustains it is effectively dead.
It feels like a joke that isn't particularly funny when you realize that people are choosing to carry these massive stacks of physical cash because they are terrified the electronic payment systems will go down during the regional conflict. We have seen the strikes against the oil infrastructure recently, which we talked about back in episode 1009, and that has clearly shattered the public trust in anything digital. But Herman, before we get too deep into the specifics, I want to zoom out. Is this just an Iranian problem? Because when I look at the global stage, I see gold hitting $5,500 an ounce and central banks loading up on bullion like they are preparing for a siege.
That is the connection Daniel is pointing us toward. This is not just about a mismanaged economy in the Middle East. We are seeing a fundamental shift in how the world perceives value, and to understand it, we have to go back to the Nixon shock of 1971. For those who don't know, that was the moment the United States officially ended the international convertibility of the dollar into gold. We moved from a world where money was a guarantee on a physical asset to a world of full faith in credit. For 55 years, that system worked because the U.S. was the undisputed economic titan. But in 26, the full faith part is getting shaky.
And the data backs that up. For the first time in 30 years, as of February 26, central bank gold reserves have actually overtaken their combined holdings of United States treasuries. The institutions that literally run the global economy are deciding they would rather have a yellow metal that sits in a vault than the debt of the United States government. That is a staggering reversal of the post-World War II order.
It really is. For decades, the U.S. Treasury was the gold standard of risk-free assets. If the central banks are swapping out treasuries for gold, they are essentially saying that the full faith and credit of the USS. Government is no longer the ultimate guarantee. What actually backs the dollar today, Corm? If you hold a $100 bill, what physically prevents it from becoming a 10 million Rial note over the next decade? Technically, nothing physical backs it. It is backed by the power of the US government to collect taxes and the massive $39 trillion productivity of the American economy. It is a network effect. Because everyone uses it to buy oil, pay taxes, and settle international trades, it has value. But that value is based entirely on trust. It is a social contract that requires everyone to believe the person in charge isn't going to print it into oblivion.
And that contract looks a bit shaky when you realize the US debt is now $39 trillion. That is 120% of our gross domestic product, or GDP. You have been following the rumors about the Federal Reserve leadership, right? There is a lot of talk about Kevin Walsh potentially taking over from Jerome Powell, and the market seems to be pricing in a major shift in how we handle this debt. It feels like we are in the middle of what people are calling the debasement trade. Can you explain that term for the listeners?
The debasement trade is what is driving gold to these record highs of $5,500. It is the realization by investors and central banks that the only way for the USS to handle $39 trillion in debt is to let inflation run hot and pay that debt back with cheaper dollars. If you owe someone $100 and you can just print $100 that buys half as much as it used to, you have effectively cut your debt in half at the expense of the person holding the money. When you do that, you are essentially stealing purchasing power from everyone who holds the currency. That is why gold is so significant right now. It is not that gold is suddenly more useful for making jewelry. It is that the dollar is losing its status as a reliable store of value. People are fleeing the melting ice cube of fiat for something that cannot be printed.
It is notable you mention that, because it brings up the money illusion concept Daniel mentioned. Most people see the price of their house going up or their wages going up, and they feel wealthier. But they don't realize that the yardstick they are using to measure that wealth, the dollar, is actually shrinking. If your house goes up 20%, but the price of eggs and fuel goes up 40%, you are actually poorer. The Iranian government is just the extreme, high-speed version of this. They print a 10 million Rial note and people think, wow, I have 10 million of something, until they realize it only buys a sandwich and a soda. Is the printing press a tool for liquidity, Herman? Or is it just a psychological pacifier?
In the short term, it is a pacifier. It keeps the gears of commerce turning because you physically have enough bills to make change. But in the long term, it is a poison. The money illusion is the ultimate tool for a government that has spent too much. In Iran, they use the faint zeros to trick the brain into thinking the currency is stable. In the West, we use more subtle methods, like changing how we calculate the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, but the result is the same. We are seeing a decline in the dollar's share of global reserves. It is down to 56%. Now, it still accounts for 89% of all market trades, so it is not going away tomorrow. The network effect is incredibly strong. It functions like a legacy system where the high cost of switching keeps users locked in despite declining quality. But the moment a viable alternative appears or the platform becomes unusable, the exodus happens all at once.
And that exodus seems to be heading toward gold. We did that deep dive on physical bullion back in episode 1443, and the logic then was about eliminating counterparty risk. If you hold gold, you don't need a government to keep its promises. You don't need a central bank to be competent. The value is intrinsic to the physical object. In Iran, the public has lost all faith in the counterparty, which is the central bank of Iran, so they are scrambling for anything tangible. They aren't just buying gold, they are buying anything that isn't a rial.
People in these hyperinflationary environments look for anything that is not the local currency. They buy cars, they buy appliances, they buy bricks. Anything that holds its physical utility while the paper money melts away. What we are seeing in 26 is that this behavior is moving from the fringes of failed states into the core of the global financial system. When the World Gold Council reports that central banks are favoring gold over USS. Debt, that is the institutional version of an Iranian citizen buying a gold coin to protect their family's savings. They are looking at the 39 trillion in debt and the 120% debt to GDP ratio, and they are saying, I need a hedge.
Let's talk about that political dimension for a second. You mentioned Kevin Warsh. There is a lot of speculation that if he takes the helm at the Fed, we might see a return to a more hard money philosophy. But can you even do that when the debt is $39 trillion? The Fed is facing two equally destructive options. If they keep rates low, the dollar debases and gold goes to $10,000. If they raise rates to save the dollar, the government goes bankrupt because it can't afford the interest on the $39 trillion.
They are trapped. This is why the debasement trade is so crowded right now. The market has done the math and realized there is no painless way out. This brings us back to the social construct of value. If money is just a shared psychological agreement, what happens when we all just stop agreeing? Is value really just a collective conception? Think about the images on that Iranian note. They have the Jame Mosque and the bomb citadel on there. They are trying to wrap the currency in the flag of national history and culture to give it a sense of permanence. But all the history in the world doesn't matter if you can't buy a loaf of bread.
That is the fragility of the social contract. Money is the medium we use to record value. If I give you a day of my labor, you give me a token that I can then use to get a day of someone else's labor. If the government starts printing those tokens by the trillions, the record becomes inaccurate. You can't communicate value anymore because the words don't mean the same thing from one day to the next. In Iran, the communication has completely broken down. In the USS, we are starting to see some very concerning signs. Herman, how does this compare to the historical trajectory of something like the German Papiermark in the 1920s or the Venezuelan Bolivar? Are we seeing the same patterns?
The patterns are identical. Corn. It always starts with a crisis. In Iran's case, regional conflict and sanctions, followed by a massive increase in spending, followed by the printing press trying to keep up. The German Papiermark is the classic example. By the end, they were printing billion-mark notes and people were using them as wallpaper because the paper was worth more than the denomination. The Iranian 10 million Rial note is just the modern version. The only difference is that today we have digital systems that can hide the scale of the printing for a while. But when the public starts demanding physical cash because they don't trust the digital ledger, the game is up. That is why the demand for cash in Iran is surging right now. It is a physical manifestation of a total loss of trust.
Well, and the US has a unique advantage because we are the world's reserve currency. We can export our inflation to the rest of the world to some extent. But even that has a limit. When you hit 120% debt to GDP, you are entering the territory where historical precedents aren't very kind. Usually, when empires reach this level of debt and start debasing their currency, it leads to a massive structural reset. That reset is what the gold price is signaling right now. It is the market's way of saying that the era of unlimited debt is reaching its limit.
And for us in the West, the lesson is clear. We have to be aware of the GDP mirage, which we talked about in episode 1351. If the economy looks like it is growing, but it is all fueled by debt and debasement, it is not real wealth. It is just a nominal increase in a shrinking currency. The shift toward tangible hedges is a vote of no confidence in the current monetary architecture. What I find striking is that even with all this technical knowledge, humans still fall for the same tricks. The government prints a bigger note, adds some pictures of a mosque or a citadel, and hopes nobody notices that the value is evaporating.
It is a strategy of maintaining appearances, except they never actually succeed. They just keep going until the system collapses, and they have to start over with a new currency. I suspect the Toman transition in Iran is going to be a case study in how not to handle a currency crisis. By the time they actually remove those zeros, the new unit will probably already be losing value just as fast as the old one. So, Herman, what is the takeaway for someone listening to this? If you aren't a central banker and you don't live in Tehran, why does the 10 million Rial note matter to you on March 23rd, 26?
It matters because it is the logical conclusion of the path we are all on. It shows you the end stage of fiat currency when it loses its fixed value. The first takeaway is that you have to distinguish between nominal wealth and real wealth. If you have more dollars in your bank account than you did 5 years ago, but those dollars buy 50% less, you haven't actually gained anything. You have just been a victim of the money illusion. Real wealth is found in things that have utility or scarcity that a government cannot print.
Scarcity is the key word there. You can't print more gold, and you can't print more productive land or efficient businesses. You can print 10 million Rial notes all day long, but you can't print the grain those notes are supposed to buy. That is why the central banks are moving. They are looking at the $39 trillion in U.S. debt, and they are choosing the thing that has been a store of value for 5,000 years instead of the thing that has been a store of value since 1971.
It is a return to fundamentals. We are seeing a global flight to quality, and quality in 26 means tangibility. Whether it is physical gold bullion or high-quality American companies with real pricing power, the goal is to get out of the depreciating asset that is fiat currency. The Iranian Rial is just an extreme example. The USS dollar is moving in the same direction, just at a slower pace. Anyone listening should be assessing their own tangible hedge exposure. Do you own things that are real, or is your entire life's work stored in a ledger that someone else controls?
That is a vivid image, Herman, and it makes a lot of sense out of the chaos we are seeing in the markets. It is not that everything is getting more expensive, it is that the money is getting cheaper. The golden truth we keep coming back to is that in a world of unlimited printing, the only thing that matters is what cannot be printed. If the full faith and credit is a social contract, we are currently watching that contract being renegotiated in real time.
We really are, and we should keep a very close eye on the Fed leadership transition this year. If we see a move towards someone like Kevin Warsh, it might signal an attempt to actually stabilize the dollar and bring some sanity back to the fiscal side. But until that happens, the debasement trade is the logical play for anyone trying to preserve their labor's value over the long term. The Iranian people are learning that lesson the hard way right now, and the rest of the world is watching very closely.
It is a wild time to be watching the numbers. 10 million of anything should feel like a lot, but when it only buys a few gallons of gas, you realize how quickly this social construct can fall apart. It makes you appreciate the things that are actually real. Family, a home, and a few gold coins tucked away just in case the network effect decides to move to a different platform.
That is the ultimate hedge. Trusting in things that don't require a government's permission to exist. The basic laws of economics and human psychology haven't changed since the first coins were struck in Lydia thousands of years ago. You can't print your way to prosperity. You can only print your way to a bigger banknote.
Well, I think we've covered the grim reality of the Rial and the broader shift toward tangibility. It is a revealing look at the internal mechanics of the global economy. On that note, I think we are about wrapped up for today. This has been a deep dive that left me wanting to go check the price of gold one more time before we sign off.
I have the tab open right now, corn. It is holding steady at $5,512. It is not going down anytime soon.
I figured as much. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the show running smoothly behind the scenes.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. We couldn't do this without that high-performance infrastructure.
This has been my Weird Prompts. If you enjoyed this exploration of the collapsing Rial and the gold surge, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps new listeners find the show and join these conversations.
You can also find our full archive and all the ways to subscribe at myweirdprompts.com.
We'll be back soon with another prompt from Daniel. Until then, keep an eye on those zeros, even the faint ones.
Goodbye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird